He said it in front of everyone, his voice sharp enough to cut through the room. "You can't afford that watch." Dolores. It wasn't the first time my brother tried to make me small, but that night, something in me broke. Years of swallowing words, of keeping peace for our mother's sake, of pretending his cruelty was just jokes. All of it ended with that one sentence. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just felt a stillness settle inside me, the kind that comes right before a storm changes direction. Because in that moment, I understood. Silence isn't grace when it's used against you. So I looked at Brian, and though I said nothing, I made a promise. Quiet, steady, absolute. This time, he won't walk away believing I'll stay quiet forever. It had been 3 years since I'd walked through that front door, but nothing had changed. The same pictures of my father in uniform, the same smell of polished wood and lemon cleaner. The house felt frozen in time, like it refused to move forward no matter how many years passed. The evening started soft, familiar. My mother's laughter carried from the kitchen, light and fragile. She looked younger in that moment, surrounded by cousins and old friends, happy that both her children were finally at the same table. I stayed near the end, helping her refill glasses, keeping conversations safe and shallow. Then Brian arrived, late, loud, a bottle of wine swinging from his hand. He hugged our mother, dropped his keys on the counter, and scanned the room like someone entering a stage. His voice cut through the warmth as he noticed my wrist. "You can't afford that watch." "Dee? What is it? Some kind of military knockoff?" The laughter stopped. My mother's smile trembled. She reached for his arm, but he was already beside me, fingers gripping my wrist before I could pull away. He turned it toward the light, forcing everyone to see the metal plate and the engraved words, "Issued to Dolores Finch, Joint Tactical Wing, 23rd Operation." The room fell silent. I felt the air tighten around us. My mother looked lost for something to say. Brian smirked, eyes glinting with something darker than humor. "So that's where the taxpayer money went." I steadied my voice. "That's not something you should touch." He shrugged and walked off, but his stare lingered, long enough to tell me this wasn't about the watch. When I stood to leave, my mother caught my hand. "He's just jealous." "Dee, don't make it worse." I nodded, though a chill settled deep in my chest. The mark of his fingers burned against my skin, a quiet reminder that something between us had finally cracked. As I stepped outside, I caught his voice from behind, low and smug, whispering to a cousin. "She acts like a soldier, but she's just good at hiding things." I didn't turn around, but in that instant, I knew. This wouldn't end at the dinner table. Something had already begun. The drive home after that dinner felt longer than it should have. The highway stretched out like a memory I didn't want to revisit, and every red light gave me too much time to think. When I reached my apartment near the airport, the air was still, humming faintly with the distant sound of planes. I left the lights off. The darkness felt safer. Sleep never came. I ended up opening the old cabinet I rarely touched. Inside were fragments of a life I'd tried to pack away, official envelopes yellowed with time, a folded flag, my father's handwriting fading across the top of a file. Beneath it all sat the box. The watch. It had been issued after Operation Finchlight, a mission no one outside the base ever heard of. We weren't supposed to exist there, much less talk about it. The objective was simple on paper: coordinate the air corridor for civilian evacuation along a border tearing itself apart. Communications failed mid-flight. I was the last controller still on the channel. 43 civilians got out. 5 soldiers didn't. When the dust cleared, I promised myself I'd never speak about it again. Never claim, never correct. Silence was the only way to honor them. When my father passed, I left active duty to take care of my mother. People whispered that I'd walked away from success, that I'd wasted potential. They didn't understand. I wasn't running from duty. I was escaping the noise. In the civilian division, the tower lights were softer, the air quieter. It wasn't glory, but it was peace. Brian never cared for peace. He wanted shortcuts, applause, fast results. Every time one of his ventures collapsed, he blamed the system, the taxes, the banks, anyone but himself. Mom always said he just needed another chance. I gave him several: money, contacts, even silence. She called it compassion. I called it a cycle. One afternoon, I stopped by to bring groceries and found him in our father's study, papers scattered across the desk, the drawers open. He turned too quickly when I entered, slipping something into his jacket pocket, a white envelope. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just cleaning up old junk," he said, heading toward the door. But I recognized that look, the gleam of someone who'd stumbled on something dangerous and couldn't wait to use it. When he left, I opened the drawer. The files were disturbed. The missing envelope had the faint imprint of an eagle crest, Pentagon seal. I stood there, the ticking of the kitchen clock growing louder. Whatever he found wasn't junk. It was a fuse. And sooner or later, he was going to light it. Weeks later, an email arrived. Found something interesting in Dad's files. Ever heard of Finchlight? Sounds fake. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. He shouldn't know that name. Only people with clearance did. People like me. I called my mother. She sighed softly, the way she always did before defending him. He's just curious. Dee, don't turn it into a fight. But I knew better. Her calm wasn't comfort anymore. It was permission. Soon. The whispers started. Relatives repeating what Brian had said, that I worked off the books, that I'd hidden money from the government, that the watch was proof of something illegal. His messages grew bolder. If you're proud of your service, why hide it? I didn't reply. That night, I sat on the floor with the watch ticking in my hand. Each sound echoed like a warning. The past was moving closer, step by step. 2 days later, a call came from an old colleague. "Dee, someone's been asking about your clearance. There were only 2 places that held that record, the Department of Defense and the Federal Security Bureau, and only one person alive knew exactly where to find it. Brian." The ticking in my palm grew sharper, relentless, like it was counting down to something I couldn't stop. The battlefield I thought I'd left behind had found its way home. 3 weeks after the last message, my mother sent me a text that simply read, "Brian's called a family meeting this Sunday. Please come. He wants peace." I stared at it for a long time. I knew exactly what peace meant in Brian's vocabulary. Control. But I went anyway. Because she asked, and because a part of me still believed families were worth one last try. The house smelled of bleach and cut roses. My mother always cleaned before a family gathering, as if tidiness could make people behave. The living room was already full when I arrived. Uncles, cousins, neighbors I hadn't seen in years. On the table sat a neat stack of papers, a voice recorder, and a single pen placed perfectly in line. Brian stood in the center like a man about to make a speech. "We're just trying to sort out Dad's estate." "Dee," he began, his voice carrying a false calm. "But there are questions." My mother's eyes darted toward me, anxious and apologetic. I sat down without speaking. Brian flipped through his papers, his smile sharp and deliberate. He laid out copies of insurance forms, photos of my house, and finally, a printed image of my watch. "This," he said, "costs more than Mom's car. And she still believes you're honest." I met his stare, steady but tired. "It's government-issued. Nothing to do with Dad's money." "Oh, really?" he said, feigning surprise. "I talked to some people. You left the Air Force early. You're not even active duty anymore, are you?" A wave of murmurs spread through the room. My mother rose to her feet, voice trembling. "Brian, enough!" He brushed her off like she was interrupting a show. "No. Mom. It's time someone asked her what she's hiding." Then he pulled out his phone and pressed play. A familiar voice filled the air, the recording from Mom's birthday, my silence echoing as he mocked me, and my mother's pleading words, "He's just jealous. Dee." Brian's mouth curved upward, so even you knew I was right. No one moved. No one spoke. I looked around the room, faces I'd known my whole life, now watching me as if they were waiting for confirmation of my guilt. I stood, every word deliberate. "Touch that watch again, and you'll find out what protection really means." The air froze. He laughed, but his hand trembled. Beneath the arrogance, I saw it. The addiction to humiliation, the sick satisfaction he got from tearing people apart. When I finally left, my mother followed me to the door, whispering apologies that couldn't reach me. As I stepped outside, a cousin leaned in and murmured, "He recorded everything. Dee, he's talking to a lawyer. In the car." The city lights danced across the watch face. I stared at the reflection until it blurred. The next battle wouldn't be fought around a dinner table. It would be under oath. The next morning, I drove to the FAA regional office, where Colonel Walter Price still worked part-time. He'd been my commanding officer years ago, older now, his hair silver, but his posture still military straight. He listened as I told him everything, from the accusations to the recordings. When I finished, he leaned back, hands folded. "You've been silent for 15 years. That's honorable. But silence doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it just leaves space for lies." He opened a drawer and slid a thin file across the desk. Inside was a partially declassified document stamped Finchlight Operation. My name was there in black ink. Major Dolores Finch, Tactical Coordination Lead. "Brian's trying to dig into DoD records," Walter said quietly. "Someone requested your clearance history last week. It triggered an alert." My stomach tightened. "So he's really doing this. He doesn't know what he's playing with," Walter replied. "If he keeps pushing, you'll need to defend yourself. I can testify if needed." I nodded but said nothing. To Walter, truth was a weapon. To me, it was a promise I'd buried with the people who never made it home. Breaking that silence felt like betraying them all over again. That night, I went back to my mother's house. The lights were dim, rain tapping against the windows. Brian sat in the kitchen, a half-empty glass in his hand, back turned. "You could just admit it," he said without looking at me. "Everyone would move on." "Admit what?" "That you're not who you say you are." His voice was low, almost tender, but underneath was that same hunger, to dismantle me piece by piece. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. He didn't want money or truth. He wanted collapse. I walked past him, through the hallway where the smell of my mother's roses clung to the air. In her room, she was crying softly, pretending she wasn't. Thunder cracked outside. I paused at the doorway, realizing the truth that had taken me years to face. Silence wasn't shielding us anymore. It was slowly destroying everything it once tried to protect. I went back to my mother's house while she was in the hospital, planning only to tidy the rooms she never let anyone touch. My father's study still smelled faintly of pine and pipe smoke, like he'd only stepped out for air. When I opened his desk, a wave of dust rose. Beneath a pile of faded receipts lay an envelope sealed in red wax. Across the front, in his familiar handwriting, "For Dolores. Personal." Inside was a letter bearing the insignia of the United States Air Force, signed by the Secretary himself. "For exceptional coordination during Operation Finchlight. 43 civilians evacuated. No loss of aircraft. Confidential acknowledgement. Not for publication." The words blurred as I read. That single page could erase every lie Brian had spread. Yet showing it would break a promise I'd guarded for 20 years. A vow of silence for the dead who'd never had the chance to speak. My phone rang. Walter's voice came through, grave as ever. "Someone filed a Freedom of Information request on Finchlight. It matches your brother's lawyer." I froze. Brian wasn't just shaming me anymore. He was prying into classified ground, trying to turn something sacred into ammunition. That night, I visited the hospital. My mother looked impossibly small in her bed, her voice trembling as I explained. "I told him to stop," she whispered. "He said you're not family anymore. He thinks he's exposing the truth, like your father never could." I gripped her fragile hand. "The truth doesn't hurt people, Mom. Lies do." Her eyes filled with tears. "Maybe it's time to tell your side. Dee, maybe silence isn't grace anymore." Her words cracked something open inside me, the belief that keeping quiet was strength. That night, I sat by the window, city lights flickering against the reflection of my motionless watch. For the first time, I wondered if truth deserved to breathe. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Brian Finch, V. Dolores Finch, misappropriation of family assets and fraudulent representation. I read it twice, calm washing over me like surrender. Peace, I realized, sometimes began when you stopped fearing the storm. I met Walter the next morning. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready since the day he twisted my wrist." We prepared everything, declassified records, service logs, the fragments of a truth I once buried. Walter would testify. To him, this was justice. To me, it was release. Then came the hospital call. My mother had collapsed again. When I reached her, she was unconscious, clutching a photo of my father in uniform. On the back, his handwriting read, "For those who serve in silence." I brushed her hair back. "I've been silent long enough." Dad, days later, a message lit my phone. "Brian's number. You can still stop this. D. Just admit you lied." I didn't reply. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, polishing the watch's glass until the engraving caught the light. Issued by Dep of the Air Force, Tactical Rescue Unit, Finchlight. "No," I whispered. "It's time the clock runs again." That night, before the trial, I returned to the hospital. My mother was awake, pale but lucid. "If you speak tomorrow, speak with calm, not anger," she said softly. "Do you believe me?" Her smile trembled. "I always did. I just didn't defend you loud enough." I kissed her hand. The silence that had ruled our family for 3 generations ended in that moment. Tomorrow wasn't just a trial. It was the reckoning I had waited for all my life. Monday morning felt sharper than air should. I stood outside the Richmond courthouse with the watch in a small box. No lawyer, no defense prepared, only the certainty that truth didn't need to raise its voice. Inside, the room buzzed with curiosity. Brian arrived with his attorney, smiling like he'd already won. Our mother sat near the aisle, her cane trembling between her hands. When the judge entered, Brian leaned toward her and said he'd make sure I stopped pretending. His lawyer presented photos of my house, copied records, the watch. "She's been using false credentials for federal benefits," he announced. I stood. "I've never taken a cent that wasn't mine." He laughed. "Then tell us where the watch came from." I opened the box, placed it on the table, and turned it under the light. "It's not expensive. It's issued." The engraving flashed. "Issued by Dep of the Air Force, Tactical Rescue Unit, Finchlight." The courtroom fell silent. Walter rose. "She saved 43 civilians. That watch isn't luxury, it's honor." The judge nodded. Case dismissed. Outside, the wind smelled like steel and rain. For the first time in 15 years, I finally breathed freely. The story spread fast through Richmond. Former Air Force officer cleared in family lawsuit, vindicated by engraved evidence. I didn't read the headlines, but Walter called to say the world was calling it quiet strength. I didn't feel strong. I just felt empty. The military invited me to receive a long-delayed medal, but I declined. Instead, I sent a letter. Recognition doesn't repair the years between siblings. Brian's life began to unravel. He lost his job, then his house. My mother wept when she told me, her voice shaking over the phone. I sent money to cover her medical bills and helped settle his debts. But I didn't visit. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. "He'll come around," Mom said weakly. "Maybe," I told her. But the truth already did. A month later, she passed in her sleep, peaceful for the first time in years. At the funeral, Brian stood a few rows away, silent, shoulders slumped like a man finally out of fight. After the burial, he approached me, eyes dimmed with something close to regret. "You won," he murmured. "No one wins when family ends up in court." I said. He lowered his head. "That watch. I shouldn't have touched it." I said nothing. As I walked away, I opened the watch, watching the second hand move steady and slow. Each tick felt like breathing again, not victory, but release. 20 years later, I live in a small house by the James River. The days move quietly now. Mornings spent tending to white roses like the ones my mother once grew. Afternoons mentoring young pilots who remind me of everything still good in this world. The watch sits in a glass case on my desk, its hands long since stopped. I never replaced the battery. Some things are meant to rest. One morning, my phone buzzes with a message. "Aunt D, Dad wanted you to have this. He kept your letter, said it reminded him what courage looks like." "Eli Finch." I opened the email. Attached is a photo of the old Air Force letter from years ago, the one I'd once hidden away. At the bottom, in my brother's handwriting, "She never needed to prove anything. I just needed to learn that." "Brian." I sit back as sunlight catches the still face of the watch. "Then maybe," I whisper. The time didn't stop after all. I lift the lid, touch the glass, and somewhere, a faint tick answers. Forgiveness doesn't change the past. It changes the weight we carry. The wind drifts through the porch, carrying the scent of white roses, and for the first time, I smile. Not for victory, but for peace returned.